Hello everybody and welcome back to the RPG Radio. My name is Winback and I will be your host today. In this video we're starting off a new build guide, and this will be the first in a 4-part series on how to play the Vindicator. This class is the Shaman and Inquisitor classes put together and will be focused mainly on lightning damage with some piercing and confusion cocktails going on in the background as well. This video will be focusing mainly on the abilities of the class, some early devotions, and everything that you need to know for getting started with the build. This should take you all the way up to level 40 with this class, and the next couple videos will go further into the gear required, devotions we're using, and all of your late game augments and components. This build is going to be a single-handed melee caster build and will focus largely on the lightning tether ability that comes from the Stormbox of Elgaloth. The Stormbox is an Inquisitor ability and it will maintain the brunt of the effort when it comes into dealing damage with this build. The Stormbox of Elgaloth will be your workhorse, and for the first 40 levels at the very least, it will be insanely good at deleting mobs very, very quickly. But without further ado, let's sit down and talk about all of the abilities that you'll be picking up all the way up to level 40 on both the Inquisitor and Shaman side of your build. To begin with, you'll start putting points into Inquisitor very early on so that we can max out our Stormbox of Elgaloth very, very quickly. If you are looking at the Grim Tools link right now, you'll notice that the Stormbox is at 20 out of 16 points, so you can tell I put a lot of effort and focus into this ability very early on. Once you've chosen the Inquisitor class with a single point, you can start putting points into the Stormbox. Because this ability is available right off the bat with this build, you'll be able to melt mobs of enemies very early on. Stormbox is going to be dealing lightning damage, electrocute damage in a fairly big radius, and it reduces defensive ability every time that you cast it. The ability itself is on a about 2-second cooldown at level 20, and even just prior to that, the ability is on a short enough cooldown to be spammable and usable whenever you see a mob, whether that is in the early or the late game. The first and only modifier for the Stormbox is called Lightning Tether, and this ability is going to deal lightning and electrocute damage while slowing the target for 3 seconds. The Lightning Tether works exactly like you think it will, in that it is a lightning leash for any enemy that you attach it to. The Lightning Tether can be tethered up to 5 different enemies, but for the purposes of your normal difficulty playthrough, this ability will likely see less use than you might think. Because enemies die so quickly when they are lit up by your Stormbox, you won't have a whole lot of time to use the Lightning Tether and the damage that happens between you and your target. It looks really cool, and it is going to be great as far as enemies getting healthier as the difficulty goes up, but when it comes to normal, this ability may feel a little bit wasted, as it is going to be very easy to kill every mob that you come across with just the plain old Stormbox of Elgaloth. In addition to the Stormbox, you will have another ability available right off the rip with the Inquisitor class, and that is Word of Pain. Now, this specific ability isn't going to require too many points right away. This is another very spammable ability, but you can get away with putting a single point into the base ability itself, a single point into the first modifier, Word of Agony, and a single point into the third modifier, Death Sentence. The reason that we're only taking 1 point in each of these skills is that the whole ability, Word of Pain, isn't going to be entirely necessary throughout normal. You'll want to have it, you'll want to be using it, and you'll want to get used to the muscle memory of casting it, but ultimately, because the damage of your Stormbox is going to be so high so early on, this ability might feel just a little bit too extra for some people. Now that being said, pick this up, get used to the muscle memory, start casting it as often as you cast your Stormbox, and I guarantee as the game gets more difficult, this ability will start paying dividends for your damage. Once we have our main hand Inquisitor abilities chosen, we're going to switch over to the Shaman tree and start working on a couple of the lightning-based abilities on that side. Luckily, the Shaman has a very strong devotion to the lightning damage type, so a lot of what we're going to pick up will synergize incredibly well with our Inquisitor class, dealing the lightning damage that they do also. For starters, however, at the first point that you place into the Shaman class, you'll want to take Savagery. Savagery is a modifier for your auto attack, so you'll replace that and start building up charges for every swing that you hit with Savagery. Savagery will be doing 100% or more of your weapon damage, and it'll also be adding flat lightning and bleeding damage to the attacks that you do as well. After that, the first modifier for Savagery is called Tenacity of the Boar, and this ability is going to give you health regen and slow resistant, but more importantly, this is one of the built-in skills for both of these classes that will be giving you offensive ability. That won't be very important through normal, but remember, like the last couple videos, if you've watched those, offensive ability is extremely important for the ultimate and elite difficulties, and having that built into your kit will be much more important as the game scales up. Even if you don't notice that it is happening, offensive ability is doing tons of work for you, especially if you are focusing on dealing damage more than your survivability, which a lot of caster classes will be doing. After Tenacity of the Boar, however, you do not need to pick up Storm Touched, at least this early on. We may decide to pick it up later, but given that this is a caster class, even though it is melee, there likely won't be a lot of time spent in close proximity to melee class enemies. We're going to be rather squishy in this class because we're not taking a shield and we won't have a lot of defensive focused options, so buffing Savagery to deal more damage, more attack speed, and more lightning retaliation won't necessarily be a big focus for what we're after. After picking up Savagery, you'll want to start putting lots of points into the next Shaman ability, and that is Wind Devil. Wind Devil is essentially a short-lived invincible summon, and you will summon a tornado that is going to deal lightning damage as well as electrocute damage, and has its own ability to blind enemies that it hits while it is following you around. Wind Devil currently is at 7 points, and 7 points is always going to be a very sweet spot for a lot of the abilities in any build that you go for. Before you hit level 50, I wouldn't worry about maxing anything more than your main hand ability, the one that you are relying on for your most amounts of damage. So in that case, we're only putting 7 points into Wind Devil to get a pretty consistent amount of damage and use out of it without completely disintegrating our energy bar. The only modifier that we need for Wind Devil is Maelstrom, and this will only require 1 point because we don't need to scale this ability up pretty heavy pretty early on. Maelstrom is going to increase the target area of the summon itself, and it is going to have its ability to do lightning and electrocute damage buffed by quite a bit. Wind Devils will gain even more lightning damage and electrocute damage at a base, so when they are spinning and winning all over the place for you, just remember you're doing everything that you can to buff the damage types that you yourself have, because those feed directly into your Wind Devils. Wind Devils scale with player damage bonuses, and if you're familiar with how the Nightblade summons work, you already know how the Wind Devil is going to survive for as long as the timer goes at least, and deal damage completely unabated. After picking up your Wind Devils, you'll want to switch back over to the Inquisitor class and choose 1 point into the Word of Renewal. Word of Renewal is an Inquisitor ability and is a heal button very similar to Pneumatic Burst for the Nightblade, but Word of Renewal is going to activate in an AoE, and not only will it heal you, but it will give you increased defensive ability as well as movement speed and less damage from both Chthonic and Eldritch enemies. Now that means that the enemies in your 7th act and your 4th and 5th act will be dealing less damage as long as you have Word of Renewal activated. This ability and its modifiers will get more points as we continue going through the game, but for now, having a single point into it for a 6% plus 250 flat health restored is a very modest ability to heal yourself. Because we are a caster, because we're a little bit squishy, and we can take a lot of damage, having a heal button is going to make things very easy to recover from, assuming that we aren't one-shot and killed once we get up to those higher difficulties. For now, you can take a decent amount of damage in normal if you get surrounded or if you get into a specifically lightning-resistant boss fight, but this ability in and of itself should alleviate a lot of the issues that you'll have when it comes to taking damage. Now, the final ability that you'll be picking up on the Inquisitor side of things is called the Horn of Gandar. The Horn is a big circular AoE around your character that will be dealing weapon and piercing damage, but more importantly than both of those things, it will be confusing targets from anywhere to 1.4 to 3.8 seconds at 2 points. When you activate the Horn, if you are surrounded by enemies, these enemies will become confused and start attacking each other while you reposition and start dealing damage from the back just like before. The Horn of Gandar is one of the most fun defensive options in the entire game, and I highly recommend it whenever it comes to playing a very squishy class that doesn't have a lot of innate built-in survivability like your Nightblades or your Arcanists do. Horn is, again, incredibly fun. It is incredibly useful because the AoE is very large, and it's just one of a kind, really. I can't imagine any other class blowing a horn and making everyone walk in circles and punch each other because they're just so confused about why someone would whip out a horn in the middle of setting everyone else ablaze. With that particularly confusing ability out of the way, though, we can finish up our Shaman side of the tree and start putting points into Storm Totem. Storm Totem is a very straightforward ability, and it is also a summon that scales with player damage bonuses. So, Storm Totem, given that it will be doing lightning and electrocute damage that will chain to up to 3 targets, all of those damage types that we have will funnel directly into this ability. We won't need the Corrupted Storm modifier, which changes all of that lightning damage into vitality damage, so you can focus on putting all the points that you need into Storm Totem right away. As of this video and level 40, you'll just put in a single point so that you can activate it, and you can summon up to 3 of these bad boys at any given time. Being that we are in normal and things die relatively quickly, you really only need to cast 1 or 2 Storm Totems, because as long as you're keeping your Wind Devils summoned, you'll have tons of those going at all times, and your Stormbox of Elgoloth will be nuking entire groups of enemies very quickly. Storm Totem will take a little bit of a back seat early on, but the points will not be wasted because as we get further in the game, this lightning cannon will really come into its own. With our abilities all explained and out of the way, we're going to move on to some early game devotions, and these are going to require a couple points, but the payoff will be very big for the few points that they require. That being said, you should have just as many as I do when coming into the devotion tree if you are at level 40, so take notes if you need to. All of this is in the Grim Tools link as well, so keep that in the back of your mind if you would rather have a visual representation of what we are after. That said, we want a very early Tempest devotion because we are a lightning focused build and it is relatively easy to get. The Tempest devotion requires an affinity of 5 blue and 5 purple. Blue being your primordial tree and purple being your ascendant tree. You can start either one you like. You can do blue or purple. If you go blue, you'll start on the Eel devotion. Eel is going to be giving you defensive ability, dodge and deflect chance, as well as some movement speed, pierce resistance. The big kicker to this devotion is that it is only a 3-star commitment for 5 affinity in your primordial tree, which gets you all the way into Tempest, or at least 50% into Tempest. Your next branch will be Crossroads of your Ascendant tree, your purple tree, and that'll take you down to Owl, which will be getting you Cunning, Spirit, Reduction to Energy Cost, Elemental Resistance, buffs to all damage, defensive ability, and buffs to all of your damage over time abilities as well. Your damage over time damage types, that is. Once you have both Eel and Owl completed, you can make your way over to your freshly unlocked Tempest and start filling that out specifically. Tempest will right off the bat start buffing your lightning damage. It'll be giving you flat lightning damage as well, along with physique. You'll be getting electrocute and lightning damage buffed further down the devotion as well. In addition to increases to your defensive and offensive ability with some slow resistance, further buffing your offensive ability and electrocute damage down the chain. And before we get to the final ability of Tempest, we'll pick up a 30% chance to increase our lightning damage by 250%, along with a 4% buff to total speed and reduced stun duration. Reduced stun duration obviously being another one of those resistances that is very hard to come by as you get into Ultimate, so really strong follow-up from Tempest to give us a stat so good. Now, the ability Reckless Tempest comes with a 100% chance on critical attack. We're actually going to affix this to our Dust Devil ability, and every time that ability crits, it is going to set off a 6-second duration, 8-meter target area, 5 target maximum lightning and electrocute storm that also has a chance to stun a target for 0.7 seconds. That is at level 20, but given that it is a 6-second duration and a 10-second skill cooldown, this ability should be dealing a ridiculous amount of damage as long as we have our offensive ability high enough to make it proc consistently. The other reason that we're building through Tempest is because one of our later game devotions is going to be the Spear of the Heavens. This one is another lightning damage devotion, and we'll talk about it when we wrap up our devotions in the next couple videos, but just remember that is our ultimate end game when it comes to devotions and devotion points, and that is why we are going through Tempest to get to the Spear of the Heavens. With that end game in mind, the next devotion that we'll want to start working on is going to be Vulture. Vulture is your first chaos or your pink devotion, and it's going to require a 5-point commitment, but you'll get 5 points of affinity for chaos out of it. Spear of the Heavens requires 20 primordial affinity and 7 chaos affinity. So Vulture is going to get us pretty close to the pink side of things, along with 1 point into our Crossroads, and our blue, our primordial affinity, is going to require a lot more points as we unlock those shrines, so Eel is just a relatively decent first toe in the door. Now, unlike our last build, this build does not have a whole lot of focus on monster and frequency early on. In fact, there is only one piece of gear that you'll pick up early on, and that you'll find in Act 2. The Ascended Shoulder Plates are an item that will be picked up somewhere along the way while you are clearing through Cronley's Den and axing all of those Aether-infused bandits. The Ascended shoulder plates, while they don't give us the exact damage that we are looking for, they do give you 3 points into both Savagery and 3 points into Stormbox of Elgaloth. So 3 points into your main damage ability is nothing to ignore, and given that these are very easy to farm very early on, there is no reason not to pick them up. As for the rest of the gear in the Grim Tools link, for now, that gear is ultimately just lucky pickups. The rings, the weapon, the amulet, the pants, all of that stuff is in and of itself some stuff that was just kind of lucky to pick up. It's certainly helpful for the build. A lot of it is lightning focused and it does do a decent amount of damage for us, but none of it is required to make it to level 40 or get through the early game in general. The only other honorable mention that I'll bring up is going to be your relic, and this is a transcendent relic rather than a empowered relic. The first empowered relic that you'll have access to will be Squall, your early empowered relic, and that'll give you lightning damage with a chance to deal increased lightning damage, spirit, and offensive ability. It also comes with a very handy little early ability that you can get called Lightning Storm. You'll want to equip it to your hotbar though, because you do have to activate it. Lightning Storm will essentially make a big field of lightning that you can cast pretty consistently to deal additional lightning damage. It's fun because you'll have more buttons to press early on and you'll be dealing more damage in bigger AoEs, but really you are looking for Desolation. Desolation is basically the big brother of Squall, and this will be doing lightning and electrocute damage, as well as buffing both of those damage types, giving you an increase to defensive ability as well as attack and casting speed, and giving you +1 to all your skills in your shaman side of the tree. Now, +1 to everything in Inquisitor would have been great, but this is the only one that shares one of the classes that we need and still does the right damage types. The skill that comes along with Desolation is a 25% chance when we are hit to cause a whole bunch more lightning and electrocute damage at our feet. The Desolation skill, when you are hit, has a 6-second duration, hits in about a 4-meter area, and only has a 2-second cooldown. So, realistically, if you get hit enough times, this ability will activate before it has even a concern about cooling down. Since it'll be going off so often because you are a melee class being hit by other melee enemies, the damage and the slowing that it will be doing will be incredibly useful for, yet again, clearing mobs out very, very fast. You'll have this to fall back on if your Stormbox isn't carrying the type of weight that it needs to, but if you're putting enough points into that ability, that will not be the case. That said, building up to Desolation early is going to be very important because having that to rely on while you make your way up to your ultimate relic will be very, very helpful. For the time being, however, that is it for the early game Vindicator lightning focused caster build, and there isn't much more to it. If you are able to follow along with the points, the devotions, and even get a little bit lucky with some of the gear that you pick up, you should be completely incinerating mob after mob of bad guys running at you until you're asking yourself the question, where did the first half of the game go? Really, once we get this character up to level 50, I suspect that the damage will not drop off. Caster builds do quite a bit, and this one being so point and click heavy should be even easier to use than a lot of the other ones. That being said, I will see you all in part 2 of this video to start looking into legendary gear, finishing up our devotions, and finding out what this character looks like at level 50 and beyond. Thanks so much for hanging out. Peace out, everybody.